Good afternoon, dear friends. Today, our guest is Nina Sorokina, who is known on the internet as the author of a journal under the nickname Asalam. We are going to talk about crystals and energies. Nina, please introduce yourself to the people who are watching our interview and are not yet familiar with you and your work.
I have been writing in Live Journal for many years, for about 15 years already, on topics related to what we call the Hermetic tradition. Hermetic is a derivative of the name Hermes, Thoth Hermes. Also, on Sufi topics, because I have been a member of the Sufi tradition for about 15 years.
Okay, thank you. My first question is about crystals. What are crystals and what kind of industries are they used in?
A crystal, unlike an ordinary amorphous rock, has a highly ordered structure, and all the special properties of crystals are based on this orderliness. Due to it, crystals have been used since antiquity as tools for storing and transmitting a whole range of energies. The fact that crystals are excellent resonators and amplifiers of electromagnetic signals was discovered by scientists back in the last century. Quartz crystals, as you know, are used as a key component of many electronic devices. Today, they are used for recording and transmitting information, for creating a focused beam of energy, as in lasers, and as a pacemaker in clocks, electronics, and so on. So, as we know, neither a computer nor a phone can operate without crystals. But even centuries before that, the masters of Hermetic knowledge knew that crystals can also serve as amplifiers of subtle energies and can be used to harmonize and enhance receptivity. For this particular purpose, gems were placed upon the forehead, solar plexus, pulse, and fingers, upon those points where energy meridians are. And later, when knowledge about the function of stones as amplifiers and resonators was lost, stones became just jewelry, tiaras, pendants, bracelets, rings, and so on. And gems in crowns, headboards of thrones of royal persons also originally served not for decoration. All these stones have an unrivaled ability to focus radiation. That's why ruby, for example, is applied in laser systems. Nowadays, they may not use it anymore. Synthetic stones have become very cool. But earlier, the first lasers were made with ruby. That is why such stones as rubies, diamonds, sapphires, emeralds in crowns had a specific function in the past. And other crystals like rock crystal and other types of quartz, although they are second to the rubies, they are also wonderful amplifiers and furthermore, much more available. That's why, in fact, they are used by fortune tellers and predictors. That paradigmatic crystal ball of a fortune teller is just a reflection of the knowledge that once existed.
It's very interesting to listen to you, and there are so many real life examples. And about the crown jewels and the crystal ball. These are all things that we know from culture, and it was taken for granted, and no one ever wondered, and why is this the case? Now, could you give us a little more detail about how crystals function?
Well, in general, a crystal has its own life and its own purpose, which is difficult for us to comprehend apart from understanding the goals of planetary evolution, because crystals are also a form of life. I'll quote Nikola Tesla, who said, "In a crystal, we have clear evidence of the existence of a formative life principle, and though we cannot understand the life of a crystal, it is nonetheless a living being." So, it's alive. The crystal is alive. It has its own birth and its own death too. But Tesla's idea was not new, because according to Hermetic knowledge, there is no non-living matter in nature, but only different degrees of animateness of matter. The mineral world is still a form of life, although it lies at the very base of the evolutionary ladder, that is, at the very first step, where the development of consciousness is extremely slow. For example, the life cycle of a rock crystal in nature is millions of years from birth to death. At some point, it stops growing, and that means that the very self-organizing force that we call life has left it. And the remaining quartz shell, which we extract, actually, from underground, is already empty. There is no life in it. It can be compared to a seashell in which the mollusk is no more. But just as an empty shell can be used by other life forms for their needs, so the crystal matrix, for example, of rock crystal, can be used by the consciousness of a higher level, for example, by a human being, for their needs, what they actually do. And here begins what we call the function of a crystal. I mean, it can be used for technical purposes, like for signal transmission. It can be used as a pacemaker in electronics. It can also be used for other purposes, for healing, for mental concentration, and so on. There was a very interesting American crystallographer, Marcel Vogel. He once worked at IBM, and then, having discovered that crystals are alive, at some point he left IBM and devoted his life to studying the healing qualities of crystals. And he said that a crystal is a neutral object. Its internal structure reflects a state of perfect balance. And when a person enters into a certain relationship with this structural perfection, the crystal transmits to him a vibration that expands the possibilities of his consciousness manyfold. The crystal, he said, functions like a laser. It collects dispersed energy rays and focuses them in one direction, and in doing so, it consolidates a tremendous power that exceeds by far the power of the individual, unconnected rays. And this energy can be transmitted to objects or people according to the intention of the person sending this energy. This applies not only to electromagnetic or other energy, but also to such subtle types of energy that we call bioenergy, which in ancient times were called chi, prana, od, or orgon. William Reich invented such a term for it, and so on. And as a focusing instrument, crystal can be used to concentrate the radiation of the master healer's field and be transmitted to another person, a student or a patient, so that his field could become also harmonized. In other words, he transmits his field matrix through the crystal.
Very interesting. So, at the beginning, you said that a crystal is like a living thing. It grows and dies, and it has a matrix as well. That's interesting. There is a comparison with the Curlian effect, when you cut a leaf and half of it seems to be lying there, but in the Curlian effect, it shines as a whole. That means it has some kind of energy matrix, and it turns out that a crystal has the same?
Yes, and the Curlian photos of crystals are very illustrative. They show that if a crystal has a pointed top, then a very noticeable, very bright ray comes from this top. And right where the sides converge, the concentration of this ray is the strongest, and it is very clearly visible.
Now let's move on to the next question. Is there a difference in materials? Because you mentioned that there are rubies, there are different materials that make up the crystals. Obviously, quartz ones are used in the technological industry. And how does the material affect the characteristics of the crystal?
I think that here the question should revolve not so much around the material, but rather the quality of the material. And the quality of the crystal, the quality of its grid. The quality of the crystal grid is directly related to the geometry of the crystal. The crystal's ability to record and transmit information is influenced by the orderliness of its molecular grid. The crystal must be perfect. The process of its formation must run properly. It must not be too close to other crystals, otherwise the liquids that feed it will flow unequally and its geometry will not be perfect. Therefore, even two crystals that look exactly the same can differ in their internal potential very much. And so Marcel Vogel, whom I mentioned, stated that every natural crystal is unique because it forms over millions of years in specific conditions, and it's impossible to find two crystals that are the same. Therefore, the healing phenomena of the crystals are not always reproducible. That means each healer has to find his own stone or stones. And according to Marcel's experience, the less defects and impurities are in the composition of quartz, the more perfect its structure is, and the better the resonator and transmitter it is. And I had heard the same thought from my Sufi teacher, who also used crystals to transmit certain energies, let's say, mental matrices to his students. He sought out a certain kind of rock crystal. It was from Brazil or from Afghanistan. So not all crystals are suitable for this purpose. But how to find this out? I honestly don't know. I don't have such experience. Well, there are masters who know it. Perhaps it comes with some experience.
We can assume that, as you said, the more densely the crystal grid has, the more information this crystal can contain. Perhaps the denser it is, the more.
The more orderly it is. It's the orderliness that he's talking about.
Well, then this orderliness comes naturally. The crystal grows as it grows. Nothing you can do about it. But the fastening of the material is something that the craftsman has a hand in, isn't it? So we know that diamonds have different types of cuts, different number of facets, but does the number of these facets affect the characteristic of the crystal itself? And if it is so, in what way?
It's probably not the number of facets that affects, but rather the geometry of the facets, the shape they are given. For example, Marcel Vogel discovered that a piece of rock crystal with its apex made in the form of a pyramid possesses the best healing properties. Moreover, the angle at the base of this pyramid is the same as that of the Great Pyramid in Giza, 51.83 degrees. Well, basically, when rock crystals grow, they always have one facet formed at this angle. There is a reason for that, but maybe we'll talk about it some other time. And what he did is he just brought the other facet to exactly the same angle. He claimed that such a crystal focuses energy in the best way and has the best healing properties.
Thank you. It is very interesting for our viewers to know that it turns out that the facet that is naturally formed corresponds to the same proportion of the pyramid, which, if I'm not mistaken, corresponds to the golden ratio.
Yes, there's a golden triangle within the pyramid, the so-called Kepler triangle, and it's, yes, an extremely interesting thing, but it's a very large topic, so we won't.
Okay, let's move on to the information field. What is crystal, precisely in terms of information, and how exactly this information is recorded on it?
The molecular grid of a crystal, for example, such as quartz, as we said, has a very ordered structure. So any information that this crystal receives is reflected in its repeating molecular structure. Figuratively, we can imagine quartz as a kind of three-dimensional string instrument, where the bonds between molecules are some kind of strings. Information is stored due to the resonance of specific molecular bonds, similar to a musical chord. Only unlike a stringed instrument, the sound or vibration in a crystal never fades. It is very stable, and the recorded information is theoretically preserved forever until it is erased or rewritten. One analogy from the technical sphere will help to understand the principle of crystal functioning. I just tried it, and I know that people from the technical sphere understand it very well. In radio engineering, they use such a term as antenna gain power. It is known that the gain of a single antenna, with all other factors being equal, can be significantly increased by adding another antenna of the same type. And if you collect several of them and place them at the right distance from each other with the right phasing, the gain will be multiplied many times over. Such a device is called an antenna array. And a crystal, in fact, is just such an antenna array. Only there are trillions of small antennas in it, and due to their total resonance, it acts as a large, powerful antenna. And it receives the signal very clearly and steadily, even through the ether noise.
And how can you erase or overwrite the information in the crystal and, so to speak, deactivate it? And what is the mechanism of manipulating?
We know that in the technical world, information on crystals is recorded and erased in the same way as on a tape recorder, except that special lasers are used instead of a magnet. If we are talking about subtle energies, the question is probably not how it can be done, but whether a person is able to do it. I mean, it is impossible to teach it verbally, because here such a thing as intention is used. And this thing seems to be invisible, but it is a kind of mental muscle. And a person must cultivate in themselves the ability to produce intention. I mean, this ability cannot be taught by words. But first they must reach a certain level of spiritual purity for this purpose. That's what our teachers think. So, if you don't have a laser, you can't record something in a crystal. And if you are not able to focus your attention, you will not be able to make any clear record either. That is, if a person can focus on one object for 40 minutes, it means that his intention is not bad in general, but such people are very few. And this is what Sufi and other schools teach.
That's a very high standard. There are studies that show that the average time of holding attention on a single news item or an object is about 7 seconds. So 40 minutes is, of course, a worthy result of the highest masters. Tell us, please, there is also such information that in religious buildings during a worship service, a crystal was brought in and then taken away. Why was it done? What was the purpose? And what did this crystal accumulate? Was it energy? If it is so, what kind of energy? And how was it extracted afterwards and for what purpose?
Personally, I have not come across any information about such altar crystals, though they surely exist. It's just that I don't know everything, but the idea of purposeful accumulation and redistribution of energy is very ancient. And in our tradition, Sufi tradition, is also familiar with it. And crystals, along with other minerals and special stones, were also used for this purpose. A person who has this knowledge can focus energy and record information in certain objects. It can be stored there. We know this from our teachers. I am just passing on what I heard. It can be stored there for any period of time until, due to certain circumstances, it is needed and until there is a person who can activate it. So the question is, when this person appears, and whether he or she is able to read and activate it. We also know from antiquity that with the help of such carriers, when they were large enough and had certain proportions, it was possible not only to store but also to distribute energy around a certain territory. For example, in a temple near Atusa, the ancient capital of Hittites in Anatolia, a cube of a semi-transparent green stone was discovered. Sufis use this stone very often for different kinds of rosaries, and it was quite large, 4 cubic feet in size. Its purpose is unknown. It had obviously been brought from somewhere else and put there. But what its function is, archaeologists do not know, while Sufi teachers say that it was just for storing and distributing energy. There were also examples of such sacred stones in Europe. The scone stone, for example, is well known. It was transported by King Edward I from Scotland in 296 and placed at the base of the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey. It was and is believed to preserve and pass on the holiness of royal dignity. So, it is still there. What information or energy was recorded on it is a good question. Also, monolithic granite obelisks in Egypt. I recently came back from Egypt. I saw them. They are really colossal, made of solid stone. I mean, it took an enormous amount of effort to first extract this many meters monolith, and then to install it. Apparently, there was some sense in that, and probably they also had an energetic function. But unfortunately, most of this knowledge has not reached our days, so we are just beginning to approach it, thus to restore it. At least to restore interest in it, just to recognize that this knowledge had been, because we do not recognize it either.
Yes, of course. Egyptian obelisks are a very interesting topic. And the fact that people always like to take them away as souvenirs, including one installed in the center of the Vatican in St. Peter's Square.
Yes, in Paris and in New York.
Yes, and even in the center of Washington, there is a huge stele, which is also in the form of the same obelisk. Also, in Eastern Europe, such stele have always been used. and in the center of Buenos Aires. That is, practically all cities have such stelae. And why are they of exactly this shape is not usually discussed. It is also interesting that probably the most famous stone, in a religious sense, is the black stone of the Kaaba. We know that it has very interesting shape of a concave mirror, like an egg shape, but in reverse, concave, and that it was an object of worship long before the emergence of Islam.
Yes.
And there existed an interesting ritual of going around this stone. What is its peculiarity? What is the meaning of this particular object? Do you know anything about it?
In general, the temple of the Kaaba was long before Islam emerged. That is, the family to which the Prophet Muhammad belonged was the guardian of the Kaaba, and the founder, or the one who built it, is considered to be Abraham himself, the patriarch of all religions, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. And this stone was embedded in one of the walls of the temple. Kaaba is a temple, so in fact, the stone was embedded there. It is supposed that it is either of volcanic origin or maybe it is a meteorite, because it's very warm. It's more like glass, and it's not so much a crystal as it is probably an amorphous stone.
And exactly the same ovoid shape, only concave. Like the stone of the Kaaba is very often found in religious and cultic buildings all over the world. The domes remind us of the same ovoid shape, but we usually see it from inside when we visit temples and of absolutely different religions. What is the reason for this? What is the peculiarity of the egg shape?
It's not by chance that nature chose the egg, or ovoid as it is scientifically called, to generate the energy of creation and to create genetic material. Because the egg is nature's real battery. It is so organized geometrically that the life growing in it separately from the mother creature would attract enough life power from outside, from the whole variety of spatial waves that are always around us, including the main field for us, the gravitational field of the Earth. But what does life power mean? We can define it as the ability to attract and hold the charge. The more charge-carrying waves a biological object can gather in one place, the more viable it is, the more alive it is. There is a physicist named Dan Winter who does research, let's say, on the edge of spirituality and physics. He claims that the egg is a biological capacitor of a very large capacity. What is a capacitor? A charge accumulator. If you touch the opposite ends of a fresh egg, just fresh, you can feel a faint electric discharge. It's the result of a voltage that varies from 4 to 12 volts. He measured it, and by the way, he even demonstrated it. I was at his seminar. The egg creates the electrical potential. This is the source of its self-sufficiency and ability to support itself energetically. Although reptile and bird eggs may vary greatly in shape, some more elongated, some more round, there is a golden ratio in all of them. We know that the golden ratio is 1.618. Why is the golden ratio present in eggs? The fact is that we do not get our energy from nowhere. It always comes to us from other energy sources. First of all, from the sun, for all planets of the solar system, and within the planet, from mountains, seas, from rivers and other living beings. And if the radiation is friendly with ours, for instance, resonates with it, it is called constructive interference. Both vibrations are mutually reinforced, and there is what we call harmony, or scientifically called constructive interference. But if it is not friendly to us, The two vibrations mutually weaken and destructive interference or discord arises. And all harmonious beings, of course, strive to become harmonious and balanced. They strive to strengthen their vibration by finding such a frequency that will give them maximum coherence with everyone. But how to find this utmost coherence? So, for all living beings, living at least in our version of the universe, it has to do with the golden proportion, or more precisely, with the proportion of the golden ratio. It plays a kind of role of a universal standard or cosmic standard. We can put it in this way. Due to its unique properties, this number is truly universal and inseparable from life in general, in all its manifestations. It can be found in the ratio of parts of bodies of living organisms, in the ratio of sizes of orbits, sizes of celestial bodies, including the Earth and the Moon, and by the way, elementary particles. I once studied it in detail. Simply speaking, this number is contained in everything that breathes, moves, and produces waves. And of course, there is no coincidence that the egg, as a repository of genetic material, also has the golden ratio in it.
It's very interesting. Once I was traveling in the north of Africa, I was in Morocco, and I remember we entered a shop and there was a lot of onyx figurines. And I liked an onyx egg of a very beautiful amber color. I brought this souvenir from there. I liked it very much. Of course, at that time I did not think about how energies are distributed there. By the way, how are energies distributed inside an egg-shaped structure?
Yes, we have seen such souvenirs as well. And in fact, I became interested in studying the egg shape during a caravan in Turkey. When we saw ostrich eggs in a metal frame made of some, I don't know, silver, suspended somewhere in the area of the mirror, I was curious as to why they were there and what they were for. And all of this led me to the study of egg shape. As a matter of fact, a sealed ovoid or egg is the only natural form that allows liquid or gas inside it to circulate naturally. Some birds bury their eggs in the sand, like ostriches, or reptiles. Turtles do that. Or some birds incubate their eggs. So anyway, one part of it always gets warmer than the other. And the warmer part of the fluid or liquid, which is enclosed in the egg, rises to the top, and the colder part sinks to the bottom. Thus, a continuous convective current is formed in the form of two oppositely directed vortices. And it is because of this property that many winemakers used egg-shaped containers for fermentation, because convection takes place in them by itself without external action. So you can seal it hermetically and it ferments and mixes by itself. The same thing happens only on a much larger scale in the formation of vortices in nature in general, tornadoes and hurricanes, because the upper layers of the atmosphere are always cold. And when the surface of the earth or water heats up in some place more strongly, there is a temperature difference and conditions for wind whirl appear. And as soon as the wind is born, it always divides into two layers, which means there is not only one funnel, there are always two of them. And they rotate in opposite directions. The upward central one, it is called the trunk of a tornado, and the downward peripheral one. So along the trunk, the heated stream rises upwards, and along the periphery, the cooled stream descends downwards. That's the essence of a tornado or a hurricane. It's a toroid, yet not a very symmetrical one. The same thing happens in an egg, only with very small velocities and on a very small scale. But there's always a vortex there. There's always a vortex inside the egg. And the famous Austrian inventor, visionary and genius Victor Schauberger, who studied water, made his first water enrichment apparatus in the form of an egg. He studied the natural geometry of different natural objects and created amazing things based on it. And since he considered water a living organism, he also believed that it should be in constant motion in order to maintain its vitality and viability. The only container shape that provides a continuous internal vortex-like movement is the egg-shaped ovoid. We know that civilizations of the past were perfectly aware of this characteristic of the egg-shaped form, as they adapted it for storing liquids, grains, and other bulk materials. For instance, the Greeks gave the egg-shaped form to clay amphora for storing wine, water, or grain. When archaeologists found such an amphora, it was more than 2,000 years old, and grain was stored in it. And when they planted these seeds, they sprouted. This means that the life force of the grain has been preserved even through centuries in such an egg-shaped amphora. And in our daily lives, we also intuitively prefer objects or vessels like pictures, vases, teacups, or others that have an egg or half-egg shape, because we too, on some intuitive level, understand that liquids in them remain more alive. By the way, plants also grow better in pots that have an egg or half-egg shape. This has been confirmed through personal experience. Schwauberger once even invented special egg-shaped compost heaps, where everything would rapidly decompose and transform into fertilizer. The geometry of an egg actually reflects the geometry of the vortex. Researchers studying vortex effects conclude that the geometric shape of a vortex or tornado is that of a hyperbolic funnel. So, what is an hyperbolic funnel for those who have long forgotten school mathematics? Well, it's like a regular funnel, but the transition from the neck to the spout is very smooth, by the function y equals 1 divided by x. If you rotate this graph in three-dimensional space, you obtain the transform of a hyperbolic funnel. And if you were to cut the neck of this funnel, the resulting cross-section will be in the shape of an egg. Moreover, you can cut it higher, and the egg will be pointier. Cut it lower, and the egg will be more rounded. Thus, an egg's shape is, in a sense, the inverse of a hyperbolic funnel. It's like a vortex turned inside out. And Victor Schauberger was the first who talked about this. He studied hyperbolic funnels. When he explored various shapes of natural vortices, he came to the conclusion that the ideal shape for generating a vortex is the egg. And thus, being a kind of offspring of a vortex, the egg becomes a perfect container for creating its own internal vortex. It's the only airtight shape that naturally generates whirl motion. Interestingly, the rotation within a whirlpool or a tornado also occurs, not in a circular pattern, but precisely in an elliptical or ovoid one at a slight angle. This can be easily observed by tossing an object into a water vortex and observing how it moves towards the center. It is possible that the ellipticity of orbits along which planets move around the Sun is also due to vortex-like motions. And according to certain wholly scientific theories proposed by academics, the entire solar system might have formed as a vortex. So the funnel and the ovoid are geometrically, inextricably linked to each other. And also, according to Hindu myths, the universe, as they assert, emerged from a primordial egg. This suggests that the universe might also have the form of an ovoid or an egg.
It turns out that they knew a little more about the structure of our galaxy and the universe than we do, right?
Possibly, yes. They might have had the ability of direct perception. What we achieve through mathematical calculations, in the end, coming to it through reasoning. They knew what is called sense knowledge.
All right. So, can the egg shape act as an energy amplifier?
Yes, it can, but not for all types of energy. It would amplify those waves that resonate with it, exactly in relation to the golden proportion, the golden ratio, because we found that the egg-like filters out waves that are friendly to it, and that enhance its life force, while rejecting the rest. So it's quite challenging to imagine, I understand. But a good analogy would be a set of nesting dolls. Let's say there are 7 dolls nested within each other. They are in a certain harmony, a certain proportion with each other. So, if you try to insert another nesting doll there, it's also a nesting doll, but it's not proportional, not harmonious with them. It won't fit in. It will be ejected from there. That's pretty much what happens with waves. Only the waves of certain proportions nest or fit into each other well. And the golden ratio serves as a benchmark in this regard. That is, the nesting dolls are built up on the principle of resonance with the golden ratio. And, based on this ability of eggs to sort out the necessary vibrations and resonate with those carrying life force, the physicist Dan Winter, whom I recently mentioned, invented a device in the shape of an egg. I think at one time he even made it from a natural ostrich egg, which he covered from the inside with a very thin layer of gold. He attached a fulminator to it and used this device to measure the life force of biological objects. So, you could place something like an herbal remedy or anything else in there and observe how much life force it has. I've seen this device. He showcased it to us at a seminar. It was very interesting.
Very interesting. And what is the peculiarity of egg shaped structures? Can you provide some examples? And what is the purpose of such egg shaped objects?
Well, basically, everything that humanity has ever invented or will invent probably already has an analog somewhere in nature. It's the same when it comes to the egg shape. All structures in the shape of an egg, in one way or another, harness the power of vortex flow as the egg shape generates it. The fact that the resulting vortex divides the air currents into external warm and internal cold ones was known in ancient times, and they knew how to make use of it, although they may not have been able to explain this phenomena. And even modern physics, by the way, cannot explain it. The cooling of air currents by vortex separation, for example, was known in ancient Persia. In Iran, you can still find ancient refrigeration systems that preserve ice without any electricity during summer, in the desert with temperatures reaching 40 degrees Celsius. We saw such a system in Kashan city in Iran. It's not operational now, of course, although it might have still been used about 50 years ago. It's called yakshal, which in Persian means ice pit. These traditional refrigerators were still in use about 30 or 40 years ago. Nowadays, they mostly exist as historical sites. In these yakshal, the primary working agent was exactly the vortex. We already know that within the egg-shaped form, natural convection is created, and thanks to it, inside the yakshal, 2 opposing streams were continuously generated, warm and cold. The cold stream descended to the lower part and cooled the ice stored there. It was collected during the winter. And the warm air would rise and exit through a special opening at the top of the yakchal's dome. So it was quite functional indeed.
That's fascinating. Really. I would have never thought that the egg shaped forms could be used to create natural refrigerators, using the energy of the vortex in order to remove hot air from there.
There are specific conditions, and these systems may not be effective in all parts of Iran. These conditions include very dry air, significant temperature fluctuations, and cold winters for ice storage. Nevertheless, in such conditions, these refrigerators functioned very effectively.
Well, by the way, the architecture of such structures is not limited to refrigeration facilities only. There are also egg shaped temples. Additionally, there are cave temples that were hollowed out in the rock. Why were they built in this form? And how do they affect a person or people inside?
Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to personally observe such temples or cave temples. But if we consider what we discussed earlier, then in these objects, a vortex field definitely arises. And being at the bottom can be quite cold because warm air will always tend to rise. If there is no opening at the top, it may not happen so intensively, but nevertheless, But if such an object is built in a hot climate, it's probably a good thing. By the way, this might explain why in hot countries in the desert, they very often use dome roofs. This also promotes good convection. On the other hand, if the proportions of such an egg-shaped structure are chosen correctly and made in accordance with the golden ratio, then staying inside will be favorable for all living organisms located there. And by the way, to obtain this egg shape that corresponds to the golden ratio, remember, we were talking about hyperbolic funnels. If you cut its neck. So, to obtain a golden ratio egg, you need to cut the hyperbolic funnel at an angle of 51.83 degrees. That's precisely the angle that lies at the base of the Great Pyramid.
With which crystals grow, right?
Yes, that's the very angle that one facet of a crystal always has, at least for rock crystal. I don't know about other crystals.
And so, we've come back to Victor Schauberger and his egg-shaped stones when he saw them floating in alpine streams at night. And as you mentioned, this fact has been recorded. What do you know about this? And could you share what it signifies?
Yes, Schauberger indeed observed how on a cold and very moonlit winter night, possibly it was even a full moon, very large stones, the size of a human head, rose to the surface of a mountain stream and levitated there for some time. But not all stones levitated, only those with a very smooth and egg-shaped form did. The rest remained in their original positions, as stones typically do. Why did it happen? We found out that the egg-shaped form is a product of a vortex, and water also forms vortexes similar to tornadoes, but we call them whirlpools or funnels. Just like in a tornado, these funnels always have two flows, two opposing flows, one directed upward and another downward. Moreover, the force could be quite substantial, depending on the speed of the flow. In other words, egg-shaped stones were caught by the flow inside the funnel, which was directed upward, simply sucking them in. This suction force was so significant that it could lift even a stone as large as a human head. Furthermore, egg-shaped stones were particularly easy to move within funnels and could break out from the gravity law. This can be easily checked. If you take a round, tall, thin jar and fill it with water and place an egg inside, then gently stir the water with a stick to create a funnel, you can observe how the egg slowly rises from the bottom, floats upwards, and remains there as long as the whirlpool persists. So, the egg is sucked in by one of the two streams in the vortex, which is directed upward. So, this can all be explained by the bidirectional vortex flow.
Great. It's fascinating. It would seem almost a fantastic story, but it has an explanation of quite traditional physics.
It's just the physics of the vortex has been very little studied, and, unfortunately, only in our century do they begin to approach and try to study it.
What are the peculiarities of the pyramidal geometric shape? How does it affect humans and the environment?
The so-called pyramid effect is just a part of a natural phenomena known in science as the radiation shape factor. In essence, the entire ancient Chinese landscape school of Feng Shui was dedicated to the characteristics of radiation from different shapes, acute-angled, circular, square, and so on. The pyramidal shape is just one of the variations that can have different effects on living beings. I also have a lot to say about this because I have had rich experiences visiting pyramids, both in Mexico and Egypt. But this is a question that perhaps should be addressed as a special topic.
Did you manage to visit the inside of the pyramid itself? And what was it like being inside the pyramid? We know that these pyramids have different chambers. To this day, scientists argue about what those cameras were there for. Indeed, these chambers are not randomly placed, but carefully designed. So, does being inside them somehow affect the distribution of energy? If it is so, then how? If you could briefly talk about it.
Yes, I have had the opportunity to visit the chamber, or more precisely, all three chambers of the Great Pyramid, as well as the chambers of other pyramids like those in Saqqara and Dashur. It's very interesting experience. I can say definitely that these chambers were not burial chambers for pharaohs. Although it is possible that when the pharaohs discovered these pyramids, they might have buried someone there. But the original purpose of these chambers was indeed different. Some believe it has a technical purpose, but I think that people could stay there. I had the opportunity to be inside the sarcophagus in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. It is indeed made to human scale. No one was buried there. It's quite possible that people could stay there, perhaps entering into meditation. It was very comfortable there, very hot and stuffy, but in general it was quite comfortable to stay there. The pyramids indeed focused energies in a certain way, and not just one type of energy, but a lot of them. They were calculated and built in such a way that being orientated right to the north, they were able to focus both the energies of the Earth and some cosmic energies. And the angle of 51.83 degrees at the base is that same angle which is formed by the secondary reflection of electromagnetic waves. For example, light from a sphere or a spherical form. That is, the Earth as a spherical form basically reflects and focuses certain cosmic rays exactly at this angle. Therefore, if you put a pyramid, it will be a kind of lens on the surface of the Earth which focuses these things. Well, someone says that it resonates with electromagnetic waves of a certain length, the radio waves as well, and it sends them. Well, first of all, they are concentrated under the pyramid, and resonance occurs in the chambers as well because they are voids. So there are many different stories about it. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, that's all interesting. I even remember probably about 15 years ago, I came across articles by scientists who were studying the pyramids in Crimea, and they wrote about discovering underground pyramids. But the interesting thing about it was that some of the underground pyramids, which later started to be found all over the world, turned out to be inverted. And they had a very interesting structure. I mean, the top, which pointed downward towards the planet's core, was made of a very specific crystal. The body of the pyramid itself was filled with round spheres made from natural materials, like hewn stone, but not very rigid. They easily break and crumble. Very often, these spherical balls are found here and there. It turns out that if they are present, then underground pyramids are likely located nearby. And I wonder if above ground pyramids reflect cosmic rays at this angle and somehow transform them, what could be the purpose of directing them with a cone pointing downward and making the tip out of crystal? So it could somehow, perhaps, dampen the waves coming from inside?
Well, either direct them into the ground, perhaps, if they were too strong. I don't even know, but there was definitely a tip on top of a pyramid. They called it the Benben stone. It was made of granite, although a pyramid itself was usually made of limestone because granite is an expensive and rare material. Limestone and sandstone are the most common. It is believed that its purpose was precisely to focus the energies that flow upward through a pyramid and, on the other hand, perhaps to discharge excess charge, because at the base of any pyramid, a pretty strong charge always concentrates. And, by the way, despite the absence of the tip, a pyramid still concentrates it at the top. Right now, they are not letting anyone in there. That's why no one can go up to the top.
So, climbing to the top is not recommended, right?
But nevertheless, there was one man, an engineer named Siemens, who verified that there was indeed very strong charge at the top of the pyramid. His name was Siemens. If you remember, there's a brand Siemens in electrical engineering. He was the one who verified that. He made a Leyden jar from a wine bottle and newspapers, and there was a very strong discharge. So, he scared his Egyptian guides at the time. They thought he had summoned the devil, while he was just using the pyramid effect. Indeed, on any, even natural, mountain with a pointed shape, you will feel the energy there if you climb to the top, because they all focus energies, including electromagnetic charge there, simply due to their shape. This is the so-called shape factor or radiation shape factor. If you give it the proper shape, like a pyramid, and moreover orient it from south to north along the magnetic lines, then it will still focus a large amount of energy, including electromagnetic energy.
Water streams from the nearby river were brought under the Bosnian pyramid. It was the canals that were dug and passed under the pyramid. Interestingly, it's the same with the Giza pyramids. They were also built near the Nile, yet at some distance, but waterways were also brought there. So, somehow, it was important for the builders to be in contact with water sources.
Apparently, yes. And the same applies to the pyramid at Teotihuacan, for example. We've been there too. There are tunnels under all three pyramids as well. There are three pyramids there. And once there was water in them, and even now there is water in some of them. And the same is in Chichen Itza, both under the old and the new pyramids. Nowadays, there is no water there, but there are voids. That's what is called the cenotes. They are apparently without water now, but in the past, there may have been water there. So people sought places for pyramids with underground waters or underground reservoirs. It is absolutely certain. Some people believe that it was exactly what produced the potential difference, generating that very electrical charge. I don't know. That may be the case.
Let this mystery remain for our viewers. Thank you so much for sharing so many interesting facts with our audience. We've had Nina Sorokina with us. Do you have any wishes or messages for our channel's viewers?
I wish everyone new knowledge, new adventures, new journeys, and all the best.
We will be glad to see you again. I think we'll have a talk in the future. We will collect the material for a new interview, because it was very interesting to hear all these facts. Once again, thank you so much. And to all our viewers, see you again. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.